Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, Executive Editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with more on the conductor, Igor Markevitch. So, we've started to look at him as a composer, and there are two big boxes from Australian Eloquence coming, his complete Deutsche Grammophon and his complete Philips recordings, which will prove, I assume, to be thrilling since we all know what's in them, and most of it's fabulous, but we're going to go through them anyway when we get them because it'll just be very exciting to see everything in one convenient package. However, there is another box of Igor Markevitch stuff that is still available and which we should talk about. We really should, because what the heck? I mean, I couldn't believe it's still around, but here it is. This was the EMI Icon set of 18 CDs of stuff, almost all of it mono. This is early, from the early to mid 1950s for the most part. Some of it ventured into the late 50s because after he made these recordings, he jumped labels and wound up with Deutsche Grammophon and Philips, which is now Decca, and ended his career on EMI. But before that, he made quite a few recordings for them, and I have to say, they're just as marvelous as the later stuff, although the mono sound is sometimes an issue. He was always a conductor of unbelievable curiosity and incredible range, and I guess they used him because he would basically do anything and do it well, do it really well. In that sense, he was a bit like a French Charles Macaris, a conductor who was just unbelievably musical, incredibly intelligent, interested in all kinds of music from all kinds of periods, performed with stylistically idiomatic intelligence at all times, and so his recordings are always a good bet. They just are. I mean, they're just almost all very good. And this set does contain his only two opera recordings, which are typically adventurous and unusual, and we'll get to them in a moment. So let's just go through it and see what we get. And just keep in mind that these are mostly mono recordings. The sound is acceptable at all times. It really is. So you don't have to worry about that. But, they are older recordings, and there are some sort of occasional blips and bits that betray their age. And, it's something to be lived with. But I'm just thrilled that this box is still around. I mean, this was originally on the EMI Icon label. Now it's on Erato. How Universal decides what goes where, who knows? But it still exists, and that's the point. So we're going to really cover his career on disc, because once you've got this box, the two Universal boxes, and then there are a couple other small things, like his Gewandhaus pictures at an exhibition, and I think it was the concert hall recordings and some other things. We could talk about those too. But they're all just fascinating souvenirs of a remarkable musical career, and one which should never be permitted to fade from our notice, because some of these performances are simply non-pareil, as they would say in French. So, disc one. And there's lots of sort of collecting things, little bits and pieces in this particular series. For some reason, these EMI recordings, he was doing, orchestral favorite discs and things like that. So you get a lot of that in here, and it's really kind of fun. First, Rossini overtures, The Barber of Seville, The Silken Ladder, William Tell, La Gazzaladra, The Italian Woman in Algiers, La Cenerentola, with a very fine Mendelssohn Italian symphonies. Now, these are mostly with the Orchestre National de la Radiodiffusion Française, the French National Radio Orchestra, which was kind of a newish ensemble in the 1950s, early 1950s, at post-war period, reforming and getting into shape. And if Markevitch was a fantastic orchestral trainer, boy, was he a guy to whip him into shape. He was also a fabulous Rossini conductor, because Rossini was as obsessive, compulsive, and detail-oriented as he was. Like the same reason Erato was a great Rossini conductor. And so these are performances of great detail and high precision and just the right lightness and insouciance of style in the comic overtures particularly. And the Mendelssohn is also a performance of pinpoint precision. It's fantastic. Okay, Strauss, Le Bourgeois Gentilhomme. Isn't that fun? And Markevitch's own orchestration of Bach's The Musical Offering, which is really quite sober and very, very musically accurate and wonderful to hear, quite frankly. And that's also with the French band that I just talked about. Disc 3 has got a little bit more of The Musical Offering. And then Haydn, Symphonies 101 and 102, and Schubert's Unfinished. Now, Markevitch was a splendid Haydn conductor. You know, it's very funny. I've said this before. There are so many good earlier Haydn conductors. The sad thing is that nobody was interested in Haydn, so they didn't do enough. But Haydn is a composer whose music worked so well in the hands of these modern sort of neoclassical conductors, because the music is modern. I don't know what else to tell you. I mean, you can play Haydn like modern neoclassical music in a way that you don't play Mozart, and it really works fine. It works just fine. And Markevitch's Haydn is absolutely on point. Then Tchaikovsky 4 and Shostakovich 1, a wonderful coupling, a long disc. It's a good 80-minute disc. Tchaikovsky was, of course, a Markevitch specialty. He remade the fourth in stereo with the LSO. That has to be the preferred recording, but this one is quite similar, and I particularly like the razzle-dazzle pizzicato scherzo. And the Shostakovich one is, you know, after hearing Andres Nelson's do it with the Boston Symphony and just make a meal of it, you know, with all of that stop and go and fast and slow and muck about with every phrase. It was horrible. To hear it played like this, with just that wonderful, sec, dry, ironic, flowing, zippy, no-nonsense, straight-ahead interpretation, gosh, it's marvelous. It's absolutely marvelous to hear it played the way it's supposed to be played. You know, like a good, crisp spring day. That's the way that music should sound. And then we get Stravinsky, The Rite of Spring, twice. His 1951 mono recording and the 1959 stereo recording with the Philharmonia. The stereo recording is much to be preferred for sonic as well as technical reasons, and for some daringly quick tempos, by the way. And it's just splendid. It was this was always one of the reference recordings for The Rite of Spring. It has a lot of personality, a lot of character for The Rite of Spring. You know, he's not just counting rhythms, he's actually playing the music, and it's wonderful to hear. Disc 6. See, we're going really, really quickly. I just want to tell you what's on here, because really the performances are self-recommending. We don't have to go into a heck of a lot of detail about them. Prokofiev's Classical Symphony. You know it's just going to be crisp and tight and wonderful. And then the waltz from Stravinsky's Second Orchestral Suite, and then Tchaikovsky's The Nutcracker, Swan Lake, and Romeo and Juliet with the Philharmonia. Now, some of these are actually stereo. The Nutcracker, I believe, is stereo, and I think one of the two Romeo and Juliets here. One of them is stereo, one of them isn't. I love his Romeo and Juliet because, again, he doesn't dawdle. It's a very, very exciting performance. He gets through it, just so you know, in 21 minutes. You know, as often as not today, it takes 23 to 25, and you wouldn't think it matters. But Romeo, as I'm sure you know, takes a while to get started. It really does. You know, there's all that brooding introductory stuff before you get to the battle, and then, the coda sort of can droop along. And Markevitch is too smart to do any of that stuff. He just keeps it moving, and it's just exciting as all hell. It's fantastic. Then we have a wonderful disc of little excerpty things, again with the Philharmonia. The Bartók Dance Suite. A really, really fine performance. Bartók admired Markevitch greatly as a composer. And this is just terrific. Ravel's La Valse in 11 minutes and 10 seconds. It's an incredibly frenetic performance of La Valse. But again, Markevitch sometimes has a reputation as a cool fish. A conductor of intellect, not emotion. This is one of the most frenetic and apocalyptic performances of La Valse that you're ever going to hear. I mean, the mono sound limits it a little bit, but my God, the end is a total catastrophe. I mean, in a good sense. It's the collapse of civilization we are witnessing there. It's great. Satie's Parade, one of the greatest performances of that. Sharp as a razor. Absolutely fantastic. Busoni's Tanzwalzer. How often do you hear that? Lyadov's Kikimora, Chabrier's Fête Polonaise. And finally, the Liszt Mephisto Waltz No. 1, all with the Philharmonia, and and all in really, really fine shape because it was the Philharmonia, even if it was the early 50s. Wonderful disc of fun stuff. You just put it on and let it rock, and it does. Then we have another sort of collection thing with the Philharmonia. Weber's Introduction to the Dance, Chopin's Les Sylphides Mazurka, the Debussy Prelude to the Afternoon of a Faun, Ducas's Sorcerer's Apprentice, Faya, the Three-Cornered Hat Second Suite, Tomasini's Suite from the Good-Humored Ladies, which is, one of those neoclassical things based on Scarlatti sonatas. It's a lot of fun if you don't know it. And Ravel's Daphnis and Chloe Suite No. 2. How can you not go for it? It has all the same virtues as the previous disc. Disc 9, Verdi Overtures. Oh, these are wonderful. You get Giovanna d'Arco, Macbeth, La Battaglia di Legnano, Louisa Miller, La Forza del Destino, and Aida, the Prelude. Great stuff. Great stuff. Weber's Invitation to the Dance again. Mozart German Dance No. 3, The Sleigh Ride. The Damnation of Faust, Ballet of the Sylph, Saint-Saëns' Danse Macabre. Oh yeah, that's meat and potatoes stuff from Markevitch. And Sibelius's Valse Triste, again with the Philharmonia. I love these collections. I really do. They're just so much fun. Saint-Saëns, the Carnival of the Animals with Geza Anda and Belasiki pianos. Then we get Peter and the Wolf with Wilfred Pickles narrating, and The Young Person's Guide to the Orchestra with Peter Pears narrating. Isn't that fun? Again with the Philharmonia, and I hate the narration in The Young Person's Guide. I just want to hear it. But Peter Pears adds something, I think, extra to the party. Wouldn't you agree? And now we have two discs, 11 and 12, and this is his one of the two opera recordings here, A Life for the Tsar by Glinka. I mean, how many versions of that are there? Very, very few. And what a cast. Look at this. Boris Christoph, Teresa Stitch Randall, Nikolai Geda, and let's see, Marla Bugarinovich, whatever her name is, with the Belgrade Opera and the Orchestra de l'Association des Concerts L'Amoureux. The L'Amoureux Orchestra, which would be Markevitch's orchestra for a few years at the end of the 50s and the beginning of the 60s. So this is like rare and important, and you're not going to get a better cast anywhere in the universe. And next, Tchaikovsky, Romeo and Juliet. Yes, I think this is the stereo one, the second one. And The Love for Three Oranges, Prokofiev stuff. This is a famous record. The Love for Three Oranges Suite, the Scythian Suite, and the Steel Step Suite, Les Pas d'Acier. And these are broken up between the French Radio Orchestra and the Philharmonia in the Steel Step. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful stuff. And, oh goodness, Mussorgsky, A Night on the Bare Mountain. You can get that in stereo with the Gewandhaus. But this one is who's going to complain? The Stravinsky Divertimento, the Pulcinella Suite, and excerpts from Petrushka, sort of the Petrushka Suite kind of thing. Stravinsky was a specialty of Markevitch. Everything he did of Stravinsky's is worth hearing, and this is no exception. And now we come to, oh my goodness, Till Eulenspiegel's Lustige Streicher with the French National Radio Orchestra. This is a fast and exciting performance of that. Maybe a little unsteady here and there from the French people. It's a tough piece to play. Oh, impossible to count. But Markevitch makes him do it. And it's always fun to hear. Markevitch is one of those guys who could get in front of any orchestra and make them play anything because he had the ability to do it. He had the ability to make them, to bend them to his will and make them play the music correctly. And so it's fun to hear this Till Eulenspiegel as an example of that. Borodin, the chorus and dance of the Polovtsian Maidens, along with, of course, the Polovtsian Dances. And then the Prokofiev, Peter and the Wolf, and the Young Person's Guide to the Orchestra. Again, this time in French with the Orchestre de Paris. These are stereo versions narrated by Peter Ustinov, who is wonderful to hear regardless of the language he's speaking in. And he spoke all of them, by the way. He was quite the polylinguist. And then we get Offenbach's La Perichole, a genuinely French performance, again with the L'Amour Orchestra, and a cast of French Offenbachians you're not going to hear anymore. Suzanne Lefebvre, Raymond Ahmad, and Louis Noguera. So, and the choir, René Duclos. Remember him? He was on all of those early Poulenc records. René Duclos must not have been that great a chorister because that corps was never great, but what the heck. So you get La Perichole, the other opera recordings, and then as a sort of fiesta encore, the Handel Concerto Grosso Opus 6, number 5, and the Brahms variations on a theme by Haydn with the Philharmonia. The perfect encores to an Offenbach operetta, wouldn't you say? And then we come to the last disc. This is in some ways the most fascinating because it ties in with our talk about Markevitch, the composer. You get, first of all, Luigi Dallapiccola, the Canti di Prigionia, the Songs of Imprisonment, one of his most famous pieces. And really, Markevitch was a master at contemporary music. He didn't get to record quite enough of it because, the record labels being what they were. And then Markevitch's own recordings of his own music. You get L'Envol d'Icar, The Flight of Icarus, which we just talked about in another video on the Naxos recordings with Christopher Linden Guy, which are excellent. And this is a little quick. It's a typical composer performance, faster. But the recordings from 1938, and the sonics, of course, are very limited. It's with the Belgian National Orchestra. And you also get his suite type piece, 3-movement piece called Le Nouvel Âge, the New Age. And it's a substantial work. We're going to talk about that in another video. It's a wonderful example of his conducting of his own music at a time when he was at his height, his most famous as a composer in the 1930s, and he didn't make any other recordings of his own works. So this is what you get. And this is valuable. It ties us into Markevitch, the composer, and it's fantastic to have. So that, my friends, in a nutshell, is the EMI/Erato/Warner 18-disc set. And here we go. We did 18 discs in about 17 minutes, which is a pretty good record, I think, to get through this thing. And like I said, this is one of those sets that's a true collector's item. I don't have to go into details about individual performances, although we talked a little about them, because it's just something that you should have in your collection while you can get it. Markevitch was that important, that interesting, and he's one of those conductors who I think is healthy. He's a healthy conductor to listen to. You don't have to make excuses for anything he did, unlike so many others, especially German conductors who seem to think that slovenliness is a virtue. I'm not going to name names. You know who they are. I mean, here's a guy who you should get because musical values are always paramount, and listening to him will teach you what good conducting ought to be. It really does. It's an education in the best sense, in the best musical sense, even though not everything is equally fabulous, and even though the sound might sometimes be a little dim, you can always know that the musicality is there. And that is so important these days when there are so many phonies and klutzes and losers out there with concepts trying to tell you that they know what they're doing when all you really want is somebody who can present the music in the best possible way. And Markevitch was one of those guys. He truly was. So thank you for joining me, folks. Keep on listening. Take care.